guys, and welcome to another video. So today I am going to make the video that I wish I had watched and I wish I had been able to find before I started law school. So I'm going to split this video into three parts. The first part is aimed at people who haven't applied to university yet, haven't applied to law school, but are thinking about it. The second part is, so you've applied, you've got an offer, but you haven't started university yet. And in the third part, I'm going to explain what I'm doing to prepare myself for final year in law school. So without further ado, jump into the first part. So you're thinking about going to law school, but you're not sure. Maybe you want to apply to law at university. What should you do to prepare yourself? Well, in my opinion, at this stage, you need to find out whether you actually want to do law. A lot of people think they want to do law and then they find out what law is and then they're like, actually, no. And that's why literally 50% of people who do an undergraduate law degree do not go on to practice law. So the way that I would say to prepare for that is, firstly, go to your local courts. Anybody can walk into like a magistrate's court and sit there. You might obviously be asked like what you're doing there, but you just need to announce to the judge like you're just spectating, and it's fine. So, and I think that's the best way to actually see law in action, see obviously what a barrister does, or some solicitors in some cases, and really get a feel for what law is like in practice. Because for me, one of the main things that I didn't really grasp and that I've learned the hard way through my 2 years of law is law in like studying it and law in practice are two different things. But yeah, because they're so different, I feel like you need to experience it hands-on, and it's really hard to get work experience, especially when you haven't applied to uni yet, so you're like 16, 17. But obviously everyone can go to a court, so that's a thing that you can actually do. On top of that, I would say do a bit of reading, but just reading in the respect that no law books, no textbooks, don't do that because literally you'll stress yourself out. I tried to do that and I feel like I almost put myself off. I was thinking, yeah, let's read about contract law, and then you get 5 pages in and you're like, I don't understand any of it. The books I would recommend are Letters to a Law Student by Nicholas McBride. I read this before I applied to university. When I was about 15, I read it. And honestly, one of the best books, because it not only tells you about law and the different routes in and how to apply to university, but it also tells you like once you're at university, what it's like. So it's kind of like that whole process is encapsulated into an easy to read book. And it's very much like dip in, dip out. So I'd recommend picking up that book. And another book I'd recommend is What About Law by Catherine Bernard. And basically that is just a really great overview of law and what it's like to study it and what actually law is and what it means. So yeah, do a bit of reading and go to your local courts, but I wouldn't do anything other than that. And if you've done those things and you think, I love the law, this is for me, apply, and then we'll bring it on to the next section. Part 2, you've gotten into law school, but you haven't started university yet. Savour your time for one. So other than that, the things I would recommend, there's quite a few things I'd recommend. If you actually do want to prepare, and obviously you don't have to, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend preparing for law school, but I would say the things that I'm going to recommend are things that if you did, it would make your transition into uni and probably the first few terms a lot easier, because you would have a lot of extra knowledge. So when they tell you things, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that, I'm familiar with that. So I'm going to break it into 3 parts. It's kind of like foundational knowledge of the law, getting work experience, and foundational knowledge of law school. So firstly, foundational knowledge of the law. I'd recommend understanding the court structure, so the hierarchy of courts, what each one does, what type of actions each court can take, what kind of cases each court hear, the judges, how to address them in each court, all that kind of gist, and how that all works and why, because that's basically the first 2 weeks of law. So get that down. And then also understand the difference between a solicitor and a barrister. And I know that might sound basic to some, but honestly, it took me a year to really grasp the difference between each one, the type of culture that surrounds each one, the type of work-life balance that you get, the money, all of that. I think it's really valuable to understand what each one is, and I'm going to do a video on that next week, so look out for that. And also understand different areas of law, so criminal, property, public, tort, contract, and EU. Understand what kind of stuff each section of that law kind of deals with. So like maybe go to your local library, see if they have any law textbooks, pick it up, read the contents page, and just see like, okay, within EU law, what type of topics are in EU law. And within criminal law, like what type of crimes are going to be covered, what type of things you're going to be learning. And just kind of, I think, kind of process that in your mind so you're familiar with, when you're in a torts class, what type of cases are going to come up, and know the difference between civil law and criminal law, and then, as I said, all the courts and how that all fits together. And I think if you understand that, then learning the law, like black letter doctrinal law, will be so much easier to kind of pick up, because you kind of have the foundational basics. And some of those things, if I'm honest, they don't necessarily teach you the difference between a solicitor and a barrister. You just kind of pick bits up along the way. So if you know that before you come, then it makes life so much easier. So work experience is so difficult to get, and especially because you're not on a degree, you're not going to be prioritized unless you go through like work experience with your school or like a scheme. I would recommend though applying to loads and loads of firms. I think I applied to just under 100 solicitors firms in my like surrounding area, and I didn't get any of them. I think I only heard back from like 15, which were like, no, you're not on a degree yet, lol, you're not gonna get it. But it's worth a try, because if you know anyone that's a solicitor or a paralegal or anything related to the law, hassle them, try and get a day worth of shadowing or work experience or something. And if all else fails, again, just go to courts and kind of get a feel for the law. So yeah, just try and get some work experience in any capacity. And then finally, understanding your course structure. So I think this is something in a way that's kind of overlooked when people come into uni. There are things that I wish that in a way that if I had done them in August, that when I came in September and I got my first assignments and things, that it would be much easier. Because I remember in Freshers Week and the week after, I was reading about all this kind of stuff that I'm going to recommend to you in a moment. And I was like, should have done this in advance. But it's just the stuff that I wasn't really aware of. Basically, I would recommend to understand the course structure. Look at all your modules that you're going to be doing. How are they graded? Look at the marking criteria. Try and understand what that means and what you're going to need to do in order to meet a certain level. Try and look at, right, whatever your career aspiration is or what type of grade that you feel like you're going to want. Look at that mark banding and try and aim for that, and think in your head, okay, previous essays that I've done in A-levels or whatever, how does that compare onto this? And be really objective with yourself and try and think like, grading wise, what you're going to need to get and what you're going to need to meet in comparison to the new university grade boundaries. Look at degree classifications and the percentages and how it all works out, and look at how your university grades your degree. So some first years count, some first years don't count. Second year, third year, the percentages of each one, how they actually work out, adding up those percentages to come up to an actual degree classification. Look at referencing, and finally, just basic stuff like look at when your term times end, look at, when your timetable gets released, look at what your week's going to look like and think, okay, I have these hobbies or I have this that I want to do or whatever, and try and figure out like when you're going to fit everything in, so that when you actually start university, you're not like thrown in the deep end and never find the time to do stuff because it's all a different schedule. So yeah, I'd recommend doing that. And on top of that, just the generic stuff, like there's a few books I'd recommend. These will help you more just get a feel for certain cases in the law, concepts, just a general foundational understanding. So my favourite book, the one that I read before uni, I love it, and I loved it and I still love it now. I actually want to reread it at some point. It's called Is Eating People Wrong? It's by Alan Hutchinson. There's also Justice by Michael Sandel. He's like my favourite guy. He's a legal philosopher, and that basically just looks at, in a really informal way, looking at certain legal philosophy concepts and how they relate to certain scenarios. Kind of really like broadens your mind in thinking, yeah, there's a black letter law, but then there's all of these other considerations on top, and it's just interesting to learn. And then other ones, The Secret Barrister again, and The Rule of Law by Tom Bingham, which is a book that in public law you will need to read. So if you read it before you come to uni, then you'll save yourself a bit of time. And then on top of that, there's really great blogs and really great legal websites. So for example, Legal Cheek. They literally are the #1 resource, in my opinion, for like a lot of stuff that's to do with law. So they'll post about openings at law firms or any scandals that happen, or people talking about different firms. If a new firm has worked on a really big deal, or they've had like a new project released or stuff like that, it talks about. Plus they have a firm overview. So basically it lists like, I think it's like the top 100 firms or something like that, like a lot of firms they list. And it basically says for each firm what their working hours are like, when people typically come, when people typically leave, there's like satisfaction for different categories of employees there. It gives an overview of like a couple paragraphs of what the firm do, what practice areas they have. It tells you how much funding you get if you want to do the LPC or the GDL and then work for that firm, and it tells you salary. So it has brilliant resources to kind of give you an overview of what the legal industry is like in practice. On top of that, there's a few blogs. So there's like public law blogs. I'll link all my favorites in the description. But there's just some blogs for each area of law that basically lawyers in that field will write a really informal blog post about something that's quite topical and current, and they're short. They're probably like 500 words, 1,000 words, and you can read them in 5-10 minutes and get an overview of just like what's occurring in the legal industry at that time. Now for the third section, what am I actually doing to prepare for my final year of law school? So for starters, I'm doing 4 modules next year and a dissertation. The modules that I'm doing are, first term I've got art law, and I have counterterrorism, media and family. And in second term, I have mental health and mental capacity and crime and punishment, which is like a criminal philosophy module. So each one of those on the module catalogue on your university basically lists like what the module is, what it's going to do, yada yada yada. On those, it has like a brief reading list, plus I basically emailed all the lecturers being like, got any recommended reading for your course? Yes, I am that person. I compiled myself a little reading list, and I've just been tackling that over the summer for all my modules. And on top of that, I have my dissertation. So my dissertation at current, and I might get into it in first term and third year and be like, ooh, we can't do that one. So at current, what I want to do is gene editing and looking at the philosophy and the ethics behind it. So basically, I want to look at China and the UK, maybe the US if I have word count, I don't know, and look at the philosophies that each country is using, compare them, and basically look at how the philosophy and how the approach that they've used has influenced the law and whether it's right ethically, like whether they should be able to do that, So it's not really like law-y, it's more just like looking at the philosophy that's influenced the law and then what the law is now and whether that law is right or not. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm doing loads of reading for that, trying to come up with my question and then my sub-questions. Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, resting, relaxing, trying to have a bit of time to myself, trying to do a bit of travelling, which unsuccessfully, obviously I'm working all summer anyway, but that is what I'm trying to do. And then on top of that, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my career, because I don't know, if I'm honest, I don't know. And I'm looking into masters, because I know I definitely want to do a masters, so looking into like where I'd want to go for a masters, looking around unis whilst I'm in London. And then also my timetable got released literally today, so I've been looking at that and trying to plan a rough timetable of how long everything takes, like all the hobbies that I have, all the commitments that I have, scheduling it into my timetable next year and trying to figure out like what days I'm going to do what, so when I start I've already got a ready-made timetable just to crack on with. So that's all the stuff that I'm doing to prepare for my final year at university. Let's hope it pays off. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful and that it maybe gave you a few things to think about, or in the description, you know, whether I've linked stuff that you might not necessarily be aware of. So I'll see you next week. I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.